It seems we be here this morning, and have a few announcements. Let's have a word of prayer as we begin the service here this morning. Father, we thank you so much for just the gorgeous day that you've given to us, and to be able to come and to worship you and set this time aside. The busy week that we've just come through, the busy week I'm sure ahead. We just pray that you would just help us just as we pause, just to be able to focus on what you have for us here today. I pray that's our heart's intent of even being here. And so we just pray that you just help us to clear our minds, Father, of everything but what you have for us. And so we just give you praise for everything that's accomplished here today. We pray you just bless our service and our time as we worship you. And we pray for even the communion service to follow as we remember the price that was paid for our sin debt. Thank you, dear Father, for it. We pray that you just bless it. Every aspect of our service today, we give you praise and glory for it. And we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. You may be seated. We do have just a few announcements just to go over with you. Again, we will be having our communion service following the main service here this morning. And as we mentioned often, sorry. But our communion service, we believe that it's in close communion as far as where if you believe in the Lord Jesus Christ, you've accepted the Lord as your personal Savior. Even though you're maybe not a member here, then you feel free to join in on that service in close communion as well. So we'll be having that after the morning service. Also, the nursing home ministry, as we've been mentioning, that'll be this coming Thursday. And if you'd like to ride with us to go to the Ranko Health and Rehabilitation Center there, meet here at the church at 2. So, and again, we mentioned that last week as far as last week we had such a great turnout. And so I think it was actually the most, from what I remember, we've had in quite a while. So we appreciate everybody coming out to that. Again, that'll be this coming Thursday, July 11th. Also, next Sunday, after the morning service, we're going to be having a fundraiser spaghetti dinner back in the back. And the proceeds from that is just donation. And the proceeds will go to help with the camp expenses. So keep that in mind. So that'll be next Sunday. All the details are there as far as what's included. And hope you'll join us for that. And then the last item is on Sunday, July 21st. We had to put that off the last time, but we're going to be having an ice cream social, and that'll be after the evening service, and again, that'll be on Sunday, July 21st. And so for that, the church is going to provide the ice cream, we provide the toppings. So pretty easy, straightforward. So anyway, good time of fellowship there. A couple different opportunities coming up, so keep those things before you if you will.
Let's turn to hymn book now to page 244. Amazing Grace. Let's all stand. Don't look at your world, so you read the right verse. We'll sing all four. Amen.
All right, we'll go ahead and take this time to get around and fellowship with each other.
Morning, everybody. This morning we've got a letter from Ron and Francis Macker, and they're missionaries to Haiti, Guatemala. They've added Mexico now, Cuba, and also to the United States. And I'll tell you what, I have to sympathize with Brother Ron in this letter, and you'll see why here in just a moment. He calls it the road trip, our past month in the rearview mirror. Early last month, my friend Robert Pickett and I got in a car and headed out of Florida with an exciting road trip through several states, Mexico, and into Guatemala. Robbie and his family had donated a car to the ministry in Guatemala to be used by the pastors. Exciting, in quotes, is one of the words used to describe this trip. 4 days later, and 5 new tires. Now, I just hope they put the new tires on the car before they left and didn't have to stop 5 times. But in any case, 4 days and 5 new tires later, we arrived in Guatemala. We were blessed to meet our pastor at the border area of Guatemala and then cross over the border and to meet with several of our churches. We had great meetings. We met in a new rented space in the Mission Baptista, and also hosted our newest church in Costa Rica, Mexico. We then traveled further south, and from our ministry centered in Ziguio, we preached in the churches nearby the area of Guatemala. And it was a real blessing for our lives into each of these ministries. See the ministries grow and to know the faithfulness of their leaders. Pastor Solomon's wife was in the hospital with a dungeon fever, and then within a couple of days, Simon was in the hospital as well. They're both are doing better now. The car we took to Guatemala was loaded with Bibles, John and Romans, tracts and other ministry helps for the churches and pastors. We were able to distribute some to each of the churches. It's been a blessing to see them make use of all of these things, and we'll have to resupply very soon. In Haiti, the Lord also blessed us with a substantial amount of funds needed to go ahead and purchase a vehicle for the orphanage in Haiti for the Caroline kids. Now that's the one that we have recently started to support. Although we didn't have all the funds amount asked, we were able to negotiate and get the vehicle with a promise to make the rest of the payment when the funds came in. And he says, pray for Haiti. He said that while they were there, he said it was very difficult for people, that the entire country had shut down for several days. There was no school, no activities, and he said the whole place, no travel, it just completely shuts down, and it just makes it awfully difficult for the people trying to live there, and the ministries there as well. And he said for us to pray for these ministries, and especially pray for the children. And he also says, pray for us. We get more travel coming ahead, and we're asking the Lord to bless, even with more progress in the churches of Cuba, Guatemala, Haiti, and also here in the U.S. Thanks for participating in the Lord's work. All the best, Ron and Francis. So be with them. And to me, all the way down the tip of Florida and come all the way through those states and all the way around to Texas and then all the way down to Guatemala. I can't imagine a trip like that, but that's why the Lord calls these missionaries, because they have the heart and the will and the ability to do this. So pray for Ron and his ministry and each of our missionaries. Thank you.
Let's turn into our hymnals to page 10. Page 10. Let's all stand. Near the cross.
Jesus, keep me near the cross. Good man, John. Good man.
Why did it have to be a friend who chose to betray the Lord? And why did he use a kiss to show them that's not what a kiss is for?
Only a friend can betray a friend. A stranger has nothing to gain. And only a friend comes close enough to ever cause so much pain.
Why did there have to be a thorny crown pressed upon his head? It should have been a royal one, made of jewels and gold instead.
It had to be a crown of thorns, for in this life we live. For all who would seek to love, a thorn is all the world has to give.
Why did there have to be a heavy cross he was made to bear? And why did they nail his feet and hands? His love would have held him there.
It was a cross for on a cross, the thief was supposed to pay. Jesus had come into the world to steal every heart away. Jesus had come into the world to steal every heart away.
All right, this morning, we're going to be in Nehemiah chapter 6. Nehemiah chapter 6. And as we're turning there, if you recall, I was going to have you answer what the title of the message was last week, but anyway, I'm going to put you on the spot. But if you remember from last week, we talked about what some of the distractions are, what some of the disappointments are that keep us from truly living our lives for God as we should. And with that in mind, that's basically the gist of even today's message is really the following up of that. Because I think sometimes we have to, in our own hearts and in our own minds, we have to kind of take a step back to find out what it is that's holding us back. We can't go forward until we know what's holding us from going forward in our hearts and in our minds. as believers. And once we recognize what those things are, then we need to basically go forward. Put those things in the Lord's hands. They're not, most of the time, they're not our battles to fight anyway. They're the Lord's. And so here in Nehemiah chapter 6, I think this is a great illustration today as we're talking about this subject as far as disappointments, as far as frustrations, maybe even in our lives that hold us from keeping on for the Lord. And Nehemiah, I think, is one of those greatest individuals and illustrations. We'll look at him here this morning. Here in Nehemiah chapter 6, notice in verses 1 through 4. Nehemiah 6, verses 1 through 4. And it says, and it happened when Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem, and Arab, the rest of our enemies, heard that I had rebuilt the wall, and that there was no breaks left in it, though at the time I had not hung the doors and the gates, that Sanballat and Geshem sent to me, saying, come, let us meet together among the villages in the plain of Ono. But they thought to do me harm. So I sent messengers to them, saying, I am doing a great work, so that I cannot come down. Why should the work cease while I leave it and go down to you? But they sent me this message 4 times, and I answered them in the same manner. Then Sanballat sent his servant to me as before the 5th time with an open letter in his hand. In it was written, It is reported among the nations, and Geshem says that you and the Jews plan to rebel. Therefore, according to these rumors, you are rebuilding the wall, that you may be their king. And you have also appointed prophets to proclaim concerning you at Jerusalem, saying there is a king in Judah. Now these matters will be reported to the king, so come therefore and let us consult together. Then I sent to him, saying, no such thing as you say are being done, but you invented them in your own heart. For they all were trying to make us afraid, saying their hands will be weakened in the work, and it will not be done. Now therefore, O God, strengthen my hands. See who he's going to for the strength here? He's not looking to himself. He's not looking out of frustration, but he's looking to the Lord. And he says, now therefore, O God, strengthen my hands. Verse 10, afterwards I came to the house of Shemaiah and the son of Deliah and the son of Metabel, who was a secret informer. And he said, let us meet together in the house of God within the temple, and let us close the doors of the temple, for they are coming to kill you. And eat at night, they will come to kill you. So we're going to stop there. But you see, in anything that we try to do right for the Lord, there's always going to be opposition.
Right.
Thankfully, there's not always somebody out to kill us, as here. But it's always opposition. You can mark it down. And what gets me, and especially in the ministry, it seems, you can do your best for the Lord, and there's always most of the time it's people doing nothing that try to discourage you from your doing something.
Right.
And that's discouraging of all things. But here, this is exactly where Nehemiah was at this point. Here he was, rebuilding the wall. It was almost done. Basically, it says in the text, all they had to do was hang the doors. That's pretty simple compared to what all they had been doing, rebuilding the temple and the walls. So here he had been doing all of these different things and getting the people. I love it earlier in Nehemiah where it says that, and he encouraged the people to the point where it says where they had a mind to work. It's a little statement, but it's huge. Because he had to, in that text, he reminded them how the Lord had not forgotten them, how that he was still with them. They were just discouraged, and how they needed to look to the Lord again. And he encouraged them to the point where he said, then they had changed their mind. I believe the Lord did that work in their hearts to help them, encourage them to have that mind to work, and ultimately that work was for him. And so here we see in this text, notice the context of the book and many attempts of Nehemiah's enemies to stop him from doing the Lord's work. If you look in the book of Nehemiah, and I would encourage you to read it, even for your devotional, that it's a great book as far as in this. And we may not be called to build a temple or build walls, but again, no matter what the Lord's calling us to do in our own lives, we're going to face criticism. So here, Nehemiah's dedication and service stands as loud witnesses of what a true servant of God is to be about. Satan and his crowd are always trying to get the servant of God to come down off of the wall. But when we do, there are certain things that we can expect to lose. There are some great and wonderful things that we have to abandon when we come down off the wall. And that's exactly what was going on here. Now, of course, in the text, what they were wanting to come down off the wall and come meet them for was to kill him. But here, think about this. That's not what God had called him to do. He had called him to continue to build until it was complete. So basically, the title of the message this morning is just simply Stay on the Wall. And that's exactly what the Lord has called each one of us to do. And so here, as we think about this thought this morning, we're just going to look at a few different reminders as to why we need to stay on the wall. And if we don't, what is it that we abandon? And so number one, we would say that we abandon the work. It seems pretty simple, but it's true. Whenever we get discouraged or we listen to others and we come down off the wall of what the Lord has called us to be and to do as Christians, as believers, then really we abandon the work that He's called us to do in our own lives, in our own hearts, ultimately and collectively as a church. So here we abandon the work. Notice here in chapter 6, verse 3, he says, "So I send messengers to them, saying, I am doing a great work, so that I cannot come down." You say, well, that was really just to save his own skin. And yeah, maybe a little bit you could say that. But really, I don't think that that's the main portion or the main reasoning for his statement. Really, he's saying, he could say, I'm doing the Lord's work. Because this wasn't just Nehemiah coming up with this great, scheme to get the people rallied and encouraged again. That wasn't why they're building. The reason is because this was God's city. This was God's work. And so here, as he says, I send messengers to them, I am doing a great work so that I cannot come down. And notice, this wasn't his work. He didn't say anything about his work. It's God's work. That's why it's worded. He says, I am doing a great work so that I cannot come down. Why should I work? Should the work cease while I leave it and go down to it? And actually, there's another question to be had there. Who's going to do it? If the Lord's calling us to accomplish things in our life for Him, and He's called us to do it, then who's going to do that work? So here, we abandon the work. Any work that is done for the Lord is a great work. You say, well, I don't preach, I don't teach. Anything we do. We had some of the ladies came in and cleaned this week. You say, well, what do you do? What about it? That's huge.
Right.
It's for the Lord. Anything that we do for the Lord is a great work.
Right.
That's why He never singles anything out necessarily over anything else. Because everything, He knows our hearts. And in our hearts, if we have the right heart towards Him, then we're going to want to do for Him in any area. And that's a blessing. And He's going to impress upon your heart to want to do something and go for it. That's exactly what He's doing. And here in Nehemiah, He's called Nehemiah to be the individual, the representative for God's people to get this work accomplished. And he's being faithful at it. That's really what this statement's all about. When he says, I am doing a great work, so I cannot come down. It wasn't just to save his skin. I'm doing the Lord's work, and I'm not coming down until it's accomplished. That should be the same attitude and the same heart that we should have in our own lives. in what the Lord is calling us to be and to do. Also, with this same type of thought in mind, look over in Psalm 84. Psalm 84. And notice in verse 10. Here's the Psalm of David. He says, beginning in verse 8, if you back up just a couple of verses. Again, here's Psalm 84, verse 8. He says, O Lord, God of hosts, hear my prayer, give ear, O God of Jacob, Selah. Verse 9, O God, behold our shield, and look upon the face of your anointed. And then here's verse 10. For a day in your courts is better than 1,000. Basically, otherwise. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than dwell in the tents of the wicked. So basically he's saying a modern day usher. He's saying, I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of the Lord than he says, than to dwell in the tents of the wicked. And so once again, even David saw the necessity of living his life for God. Even anything that we do for him, if it's for him, the Lord will bless it, and actually we'll have peace in our hearts about it. And once again, and he may call you to do something that maybe is different than what he's calling me to do, and that's okay. He didn't call us to be robots.
Right.
He's going to put people in your path that he may never put in my path, and vice versa, to reach for him. So it's our duty to reach them. So there's nothing that God's put in our path that's for naught. So here we abandon the work. First of all, we see that Nehemiah's call and commission was to a great work. Also, Satan will try every trick in his arsenal to get you to come down off the wall. But you need to just stay on the wall. We're going to look at a couple of texts in the New Testament. Look at James. James chapter 4 and verse 7. James 4 verse 7, it says, Therefore, submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. So here, notice in there, verse 7, therefore submit to God. Basically, do the work. Don't come off the wall. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. And he's going to do, as we've already mentioned, he's going to do anything and everything to try to discourage us from accomplishing the task that God has for us. Everything. So here, Satan tries every trick. Notice in 2 Peter, another text here in the New Testament with this thought in mind. 2 Peter chapter 3, notice in verse 14. 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 14, it says this, Therefore, beloved, looking forward to these things, be diligent to be found by him in peace, without spot and blameless. And consider that the long-suffering of our Lord is salvation, as also our beloved brother Paul, according to the wisdom given to him, has written to you. So here he says in verse 14, Therefore, beloved, looking forward to these things, and what are those things? Look as back to verse 12, he says, looking for and hastening the coming of the day of God, because of which the heavens will be dissolved, being on fire, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Nevertheless, we, according to his promise, look for a new heaven and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. Then you come into verse 14. Therefore, because of this, he says, Beloved, looking forward to these things, be diligent to be found by him in peace. What's it saying here? Don't come off the wall. There's great things ahead for us. But he's called us to accomplish things while we're here. We also have to be careful, as the saying goes, that We're not so heavenly minded that we're of no earthly good. And we could say that that's true even for the Lord while we're here. So we have to be careful, not that we don't abandon the work. Also, God's plan and His work are just too great for us to abandon them for the devil's foolishness. Think about that. Anytime that we're tempted to sin, especially when we fall into sin at times, that's foolishness. Think about what we're abandoning. Where it's not just God's will and purpose for our life, we're basically abandoning His commands. You know, in Sunday school, that's what really we're getting, and Brother Allen's getting to in each one of these lessons. The point of the temple, the point of the tabernacle, was not just for, as it can be so easily said here, is the sense that we just come and it's just our duty to come into sacrifice. You know, when we have to sacrifice and the different days, religious days, all those things can become so trite. What God's calling us to be is to have the heart to want to do for Him, to want to obey Him, to want to accept His commands. There's a whole big difference there. And just basically, as we mentioned so often, obeying out of duty rather than delight. He wants us to delight in Him. And obviously the devil wants no part of it. So here, we would say that we abandon the work. Secondly, we would say, and going back there to Nehemiah chapter 6, in the text there, we would say in verse 3, at the end of verse 3, where he says, "Why should the work cease while I leave it and go down to you?" Here we abandon not only the work itself, but we would say that we also abandon the right way. We abandon the right way. It seems to have been Nehemiah's manner of life to give himself 100% to his work. Think about it. Think about how far he had come in encouraging the people to not only work to get this job accomplished, to rebuild the wall, but they're almost done. And isn't that sometimes where the devil really discourages us?
Right.
I mean, you can almost see the end result right before you, and that's when he discourages you.
Mm-hmm.
You can be in a highlight of your life. The Lord can be doing a wonderful work in our lives. And that's exactly when Satan's going to discourage us as well. Actually, I'd say that's when he's going to discourage us the most. So here, we abandon the right way. We would say also to come down off the wall would have been to step down and also to go backwards for the Lord. When we step down from the Lord's work, we're turning away from the path of righteousness and godliness. God calls in us to walk in a straight path, in a straight line for Him. Notice in Proverbs chapter 4, beginning in verse 23. Proverbs chapter 4, beginning in verse 23, it says, Keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it springs the issues of life. Put away from you a deceitful mouth, and put perverse lips far from you. Let your eyes look straight ahead, and your eyelids look right before you. Ponder the path of your feet, and let all your ways be established. Do not turn to the right or to the left. Remove your foot from evil. Those are some important verses, and they fall right in line with what we're getting across here. Notice there, he said, begins in verse 23 and says, keep your heart with all diligence. Notice what he talks about following. He talks about the mouth, he talks about the lips, the eyes, he talks about your feet, all these different body parts. But first and foremost is there in verse 23, where he says, keep your heart with all diligence. He says, why? For out of it springs the issues of life. Whatever's in your heart is going to come out of your mouth, it's going to come out of your lips, and whatever, and it's going to, you're going to feed even through your eyes and what's in your heart. You're going to go to wherever your heart is longing for, whether it's godliness or sinfulness. It's going to gravitate towards those things. So here, the author had to write when he says in verse 23 to keep our heart with all diligence. Why? Because Satan is constantly working on against us to be able to drive our hearts away from the Lord, away from His will and the accomplishments that He wants for us, for Him, and come down off the wall. That's really exactly what He's wanting from us. He's wanting to destroy our lives for the Lord. So then he goes on, and he says in verse 24, put away from you deceitful mouth, and put perverse lips from you. You stop and think about it. Whatever comes out of our mind, out of our hearts, whatever comes out of our lips, and whatever we're looking at, if it's the wrong things, and then even at the end, wherever we go, if it's the wrong places, it really comes back to a heart that is not really, it either doesn't know God at all, or is far from Him. And that's really is the question to be begged. If that's our hearts, then we have a heart problem. We need to return to the Lord. So here we are abandoning each one of these precepts, and we abandon the right way. And then the third point is this. We also abandon our witness when we come and step back from God's will for our lives. There, going back there again to Nehemiah, and verse 3 again. And let's look back there again, Nehemiah chapter 6. And beginning there in verse 3, we abandon our witness. He says, why should the work cease while I leave it and go down to you? Really, the witness, or as far as the work, and really the witness is the work, even here. And he says in verse 4, going on, but they sent to me this message 4 times and answered them in the same manner. So once again, he was resolved in his heart. He wasn't leaning towards, okay, let's go down and see what they want. He was resolved that even in his own witness, and he had already understood, and I think the Lord allowed him to be able to understand that what they were wanting was not anything good. It was actually to do him harm. Came out later in the text, as we've already read. But here again, our witness, when we fail to do what the Lord has called us to do, we have a lost world that's watching us like a hawk. They see what we're doing. They see what we're not doing. And when we say that we're a Christian and we don't act like a Christian at times, they're very quick, if you haven't noticed, to jump on that with all fours. We also have to, we would say, in with that, is to be careful of why we do what we do for the Lord. It's not just because people are watching. It's because it's in our heart. So we abandon our witness. Nehemiah held a place of great authority and respect among the people. If he had come down, then the work would have stopped, and the work may have never been finished. All Jerusalem was watching his lead. Think about it. We would say ultimately it was the Lord, but Nehemiah was the one that went before the people and he had encouraged their hearts to do the work to begin with. So if he had come down off the wall just to go basically down to accomplish something else, what was that telling the people? Basically that this work was not really that important. It could wait. Also, we say that we need to realize that we are being watched by a growing body of younger, impressionable believers. If we step down from the Lord's work, they may stumble. They may begin to wonder, well, what's the use, or what's the importance? If it seems like other things of the Lord are not important to us. So what can we do? We would say stay on the wall for Christ and keep on living for Him. Look in John chapter 6. John chapter 6. beginning verse 60. And it says, therefore, again, John chapter 6, beginning verse 60, it says, therefore many of his disciples, when they heard this, said, this is a hard saying, who can understand it? And then notice in verse 61, it says, when Jesus knew in himself that his disciples complained about this, he said to them, does this offend you? What then if you should see the Son of Man ascend where he was before? Talking about going back up to heaven. Verse 63. It is the Spirit who gives life. The flesh profits nothing. The words that I speak to you are spirit, and they are life. But there are some of you who do not believe. For Jesus knew from the beginning who they were who did not believe, and who would betray him. And he said, therefore I have said to you that no one can come to me unless it has been granted to him by my Father. From that time, many of his disciples went back and walked with him no more. Notice this text. Notice what's happening. And it says, then Jesus said to the 12, do you also want to go away? But Simon Peter answered him, and notice what he says, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. Also, we have come to believe and know that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. We could say a lot about Peter and shake our heads and roll our eyes at him at times in his life. But really, we could do the same thing about our own lives, right? And the thought of it is here, Peter really redeems himself, doesn't he, in this statement. Here, amidst everything else, and here's the same Peter that would deny the Lord 3 times. But what ended up happening with Peter? He went on to not only feel sorrow over that, he ended up living the rest of his life for the Lord to the point where he was crucified upside down because he didn't see himself as worthy to be crucified right side up. This is the same Peter. And he says this, he says, Lord, to whom shall we go? Who are we going to go to? And we would ask this same thing for even the work that the Lord's called us to do. What would we do otherwise? We're called Christians. We're called Christ-like ones. So to accomplish his will and his purpose in our life, to live our lives for him, to be pleasing to him, hating what displeases him, what else can we do? This is what he's called us to be. This is the type of life he's called us to do. And I would say this, it should seem foreign to us to do anything else. Why? Because we're called Christians. Verse 68, but Simon Peter answered to him, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of life. Also, we have come to believe and know that you are the Christ and the Son of the living God. Here he gives a great dissertation in this short little statement as far as in who he believes Jesus Christ truly is. Then he says in verse 70, Jesus answered them, and he answers and responds back, did I not choose you, the 12, and one of you is a devil? He spoke of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, for it was he who would betray him, being one of the 12. But here in all of this, we see how they stayed the course. And going back to Nehemiah, he stayed the course. He didn't come down off the wall. He didn't give in to the enemy. He saw it for what it was. It was an attack. And as we've already mentioned, Satan's going to continue to attack us with every ounce that he has. So we have to be wary of his attacks, knowing how he operates and realizing that he doesn't want any good for us, but he wants to destroy us. That's what he wants. So we need to be careful. And the last thought is this: we abandon the welfare, ultimately then, of the heathen. Not only our own witness, but also the welfare of those outside of Christ. Notice in verse 4 of the same text, he says, going back to Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 4, he says, "But they sent me this message 4 times, and I answered them in the same manner." I don't know about you, but my first thought whenever I saw this text was, you'd think they'd get the message. He's not coming. And so here, even in this text, he says, "But they sent me the message 4 times, and I answered them in the same manner." Here, if we abandon the welfare, we abandon the welfare of the heathen. Jerusalem was known by all, Jew and heathen alike, as the place where God was worshipped. Nehemiah loved God and wanted to rebuild the fallen city so that God could be worshipped and the lost could be converted to him. To have come down off the wall would have been equal to forgetting the eternal danger that the sin places us in. Anytime God is worshipped and proclaimed in truth and sincerity, souls will hear the truth of the gospel and have the opportunity to be saved.
True.
And when we neglect that, then basically we've neglected God's will for the church. Nehemiah saw that was actually that was the same truth even for his generation. Was setting the Lord before them. And even he said, he was just building the walls. The walls of what? Of the temple of Jerusalem. He was rebuilding God's city back. It was a testament to not only to the heathen, not only to the nation there, but also to the heathen nations around. What was going on? And also we would say too with that is the thought that it was also a testament not only to Nehemiah being able to get the work done, but ultimately to God himself. Before this, even though there were heathen nations around them, they actually had a godly fear of the nation of Israel before all this had occurred. So here, that we would abandon the welfare of the heathen. Anytime God is worshipped and proclaimed in truth and sincerity, souls will have the opportunity to come to know him. You and I are the only light some people will ever see.
Right.
Think about that. If Nehemiah wasn't faithful in proclaiming what God wanted to accomplish as far as the work, who else would have done it? It wasn't going to be in the people. They were discouraged. They were discouraged and despondent to the point that they weren't doing anything. So sometimes we are the individuals, the light that the Lord wants to use to be able to be the influence in other people's lives. Are we being faithful? Therefore, we must not be dimmed by the world, but we must shine brightly. We'd also say we're the only Bible sometimes many people read. That can be a scary thought if we're not living our lives for God as we should. Therefore, it must be clear in our witness and also pure in our lives. One last text we're going to look at this morning is in 1 Corinthians chapter 14. 1 Corinthians chapter 14. Beginning of verse 6. 1 Corinthians chapter 14, beginning of verse 6. It says, "But now, brethren, if I come to you speaking with tongues, what shall I profit you unless I speak to you either by revelation or by knowledge, by prophesying or by teaching? Even things without life, whether flute or harp, when they make a sound, unless they make a distinction in the sounds, how will it be known what is piped or played? For if the trumpet makes an uncertain sound, who will prepare for battle. So likewise, here's the point, verse 9, so likewise you, unless you utter by the tongue words easy to understand, how will it be known what is spoken? For you will be speaking into the air. There are, it may be, so many kinds of languages in the world, and none of them is without significance. Therefore, if I do not know the meaning of the language, I shall be a foreigner to him who speaks, and he who speaks will be a foreigner to me. Even so you, since you are zealous for spiritual gifts, let it be for the edification of the church that you seek to excel. Therefore, let him who speaks in a tongue pray for that he may interpret. For if I pray in a tongue, my spirit prays, but my understanding is unfruitful. What is the conclusion then? I pray with the Spirit, and I will also pray with the understanding. I will sing with the Spirit, and I will also sing with the understanding. So here, as he's talking here, notice here the thought also what this is, as far as in that we need to be clear in our witness and also pure in our lives. I thought it was interesting here in these verses. Notice in verse 7, it says, even things without life, whether flute or harp, when they make a sound, unless they make a distinction in the sounds, how will it be known what is piped or played? We need to make a distinction in our lives, don't we? Number one, we need to be quote-unquote playing, in the sense that we need to be giving forth the truth. We need to be that witness. Also in this, in the text here, he's getting at the point that unless we're prepared, unless we're being, as we come before people, if our witness is being understood, that should be first and foremost. But then also that we're actually accomplishing it. And here in our witness and in our lives, we have to be careful that the world doesn't just hear some clanging cymbal or something that doesn't make sense. We need to be able to realize that the Lord Jesus Christ, His Word, is first and foremost in our lives. They don't look at our lives of what we say and then also how we live our lives as something totally different, and it doesn't add up. So we have to be careful in our own lives. Came across this illustration that is entitled "A Sunday School of One." It says a missionary of the American Sunday School Union tells a story like this. He had organized a Sunday school in the fall of the year in his territory, a portion of the Middle West. And one Sunday morning in the following winter, he made his way through deep snow to the schoolhouse to see how the work was coming along. Smoke was coming out of the chimney, and the bell began to ring as he drew near. Entering the house, he found only one person, a boy of 14 years old. Was that the last bell for Sunday school? The missionary asked. He was told that it was. How has the Sunday school been getting along? He inquired. Oh, it was doing first rate till the bad weather came, the boy replied, but since then it has not been doing so well. They chatted pleasantly by the warm fire the boy had built and waited, but no one else came. How many were here last Sunday? The missionary asked. Just me, the boy replied. Well, that's not very encouraging. No, was the reply, but I thought if I came and built the fire and rung the bell, somebody else might come. How many were here 2 weeks ago? Just me, was the same reply. On further questioning, the missionary learned that the boy intended to repeat the process until he was told to quit. He said he did not want to see the Sunday school go down. The incident does not record the further history of the Sunday school of just one boy, but the expression "just me" means a little more to us, since meditating on the faithfulness of the lad. And you think about this and came across that illustration, and it really fits and ties in exactly with Nehemiah. You know, Nehemiah really in the end, and you think about the different discouragements that keep us from accomplishing God's will. If anything would be discouraging, it'd be Nehemiah. If you remember the beginning of the story, whenever he came in at night and went up to the wall and saw the destruction, he saw also the despondency of the people. That would be very discouraging, wouldn't it? But here, Nehemiah understood that it wasn't about him. It wasn't about even the situation at hand. It was about what God wanted accomplished. And so he had a mind to work. And thankfully, the Lord didn't work in the other people's minds to work as well, using Nehemiah's encouragement. And they got the work accomplished. And so here we say that that's exactly, and even with that illustration as a little boy, I can't imagine how discouraging that would be if you're the only one. But the thought of it is keep on going on for the Lord. That's the whole point of this message. No matter what's going on in our lives and what's going on in your life, it's not maybe, I guarantee it's probably something different than in my life. But once again, Satan knows how to distract us. He knows how to discourage us. He knows how to uproot what the Lord is trying to do in our hearts and minds. We need to be weary of his attacks, just like Nehemiah was wary of the attack, the impending attack that was going to be upon his life. And he was careful not to give into it and keep on keeping on and do the work that was at hand. So our duty is clear. Refuse to listen to the calls and the challenges of the devil. Stay in the battle for Christ and don't come down off the wall for any reason. And that's really the call that he's given to each one of us. So once again, you say, well, you're a pastor, I do this, I do that. We're all in the same battle together.
Right.
Because Satan is constantly on the attack. And so we need to understand the attack, and be able to realize we have a God whom we can trust in all things. Let's close our word of prayer as we end. Father, we're just so thankful for this account, Father, in your word. Nehemiah, thankful to Father for his resolve to stay in the fight, to be able to realize that to build the temple, to be able to rebuild the wall was what you had called him to do, to accomplish it. We're thankful to Father for his resolve to not give in to Satan, not give in to the attacks, but ultimately to live his life for you and to accomplish what you had wanted for him. And I pray, dear Father, you help us to realize that it's not just in our own lives individually, but people are watching our lives. I pray you help us to be good witnesses, Father, of you and for you. And we ask these things in Jesus' name. We're going to have a time of invitation as we close. And if the Lord has spoken to your heart, maybe this time we could spend some time with him and to maybe ask him to do a work in your heart through the things that have been shown. And so we'll give this opportunity to you. You can come to the altar. It's here. You can come to pray. And we give this opportunity for you. I'm going to stand at church page number 278. close a word of prayer, and we'll have about a 5-minute intermission, and then, if you would, when you come back in, we'll have the Lord's Supper. We'll just meet over here on this side as we normally do. So let's close a word of prayer as we do. Father, we thank you so much again for your word. I pray that you take the words that have been said from your word, and I pray, dear Father, that you do a work in each one of our hearts. And I pray that you'd help us to be faithful, dear Father, in the time you've given to us in this life to accomplish, dear Father, your will, your way, dear Father, for us. I pray that if we've maybe given up on you, maybe we're discouraged, and not accomplishing the work that you've called us to be and to do, we pray, dear Father, that you do that work within us. Pray that we rejuvenate, dear Father, your spirit within us, just to encourage our hearts in you. There's many different things that will discourage us from going on for you, like past, maybe loss, maybe discouragement in various other ways, but I pray you help us to realize that you want us to continue to move on. So I pray, dear Father, that you continue to do the work in our hearts that only you can do. We trust in you for it.